When my daughter-in-law told me to stop interfering, I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. I stepped back completely. A week later, my son stood on my porch and admitted 4 words I never expected to hear. Mom, we're falling apart. The brass house key felt cold between my fingers as I set it down beside the fruit bowl. My daughter-in-law Megan stood by the stainless refrigerator with her arms folded across her beige linen blouse. She had just found a plate of warm blueberry pancakes on the breakfast bar made from scratch, while 7-year-old Toby finished his morning spelling list. "You're just Grandma." "Don't interfere," Megan said, her voice sharp and even. "We follow a strict, low-glycemic meal schedule on weekdays. I've printed the chart 3 times. When you step in and change things, it undermines our household authority." My son Brian sat at the dining table with his laptop open, staring intently at a spreadsheet. He heard every word, yet he simply reached for his travel mug and took a sip of black coffee without glancing up. He worked as an assistant project manager for a local civil engineering firm, constantly trying to maintain peace by pretending small skirmishes never happened. I did not raise my voice or offer an excuse. At 63, having spent 32 years managing patient schedules and administrative records at an orthopedic clinic in suburban Columbus, Ohio, I understood systems and protocol. I also understood when presence was no longer valued. "I understand, Megan," I replied softly, smoothing down the front of my gray knit cardigan. "I won't disrupt your routine any longer." I picked up my purse from the entryway bench. Toby looked up from his notebook, his brown eyes wide with confusion, holding his pencil in midair. I gave him a gentle smile, tapped the edge of his workbook encouragingly, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, Megan picked up the ceramic plate and scraped the remaining pancakes directly into the trash container. The heavy oak door clicked shut with a decisive finality. As I drove my sedan out of the driveway, I noticed Brian's garage door closing slowly behind me. For the past 2 years, my weekly calendar had revolved entirely around Brian and Megan's busy schedule. After my husband Arthur passed away from cardiac failure 3 winters ago, helping my son's family became my primary way to stay active. I took pride in being dependable, arriving at 7 every morning to ensure the household operated without friction. Megan worked as an associate director for an educational software company, often taking calls with clients across 3 different time zones. Brian's job required frequent site visits across the county. Because of their demanding commitments, I managed the intricate web of daily domestic logistics that kept their lives running smoothly. I was the one who tracked Toby's prescription refills for his chronic eczema, ensuring the topical ointment was applied 20 minutes before his morning bus arrived. I logged the precise dates for furnace filter replacements, rotated the pantry supplies to prevent waste, and coordinated the mobile dog groomer for their golden retriever Buster. None of these tasks appeared on Megan's color-coded digital wall planner. They were simply completed before anyone thought to ask. Over recent months, however, Megan had begun viewing my quiet efficiency as an unwelcome intrusion. If I folded the laundry, she complained that the towels were not stacked according to fabric weight. If I organized the mudroom shoe racks, she claimed I was misplacing Brian's cycling gear. On Wednesday evening, I sat at my own kitchen table in my modest 2-bedroom ranch house 3 miles away. My living room was quiet, lit only by the reading lamp beside my armchair. For the first time in years, my Thursday morning contained no obligations. I opened my personal planner, took a blue ballpoint pen, and drew a single clean line across the entries for morning carpool and afternoon homework supervision. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking the quiet beginning of a shift I had delayed for far too long. Thursday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and pale sunlight filtering through my garden window. Ordinarily, by 6:30, I would be unlocking Brian's side door, turning on their coffee maker, and walking Buster around the cul-de-sac before Toby woke up. Today, I remained in my flannel robe, brewing a pot of loose-leaf English breakfast tea in my own kitchen. At 7:15, my landline phone chimed on the kitchen counter. The caller ID showed Brian's cell phone number. I let the device ring 4 times before picking up the receiver with a calm greeting. "Mom, Where are you? Brian asked. His voice hurried, accompanied by the muffled sound of running water in the background. Megan has an early regional strategy call, and I can't find Toby's permission slip for the Science Museum field trip. Good morning, Brian, I said evenly. The signed school documents are in the blue folder inside the third kitchen drawer. As I mentioned yesterday, I won't be coming over to manage the morning routine. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the rustle of papers. Mom, come on. Megan was just stressed about her quarterly review. You know how she gets when work piles up. We really need an extra hand with the bus stop today. I have committed to my own schedule today, Brian. I answered, keeping my tone entirely neutral. I'm sure you and Megan can divide the morning tasks effectively. After hanging up, I finished my tea, dressed in comfortable denim trousers, and walked over to the local community center. The director had mentioned a volunteer opening in their literacy program 2 weeks prior, a role I had previously declined due to family duties. I filled out the background check paperwork, signed the orientation agreement, and scheduled my first training session for the upcoming Monday morning. By the weekend, the absence of my daily presence began creating noticeable cracks in their carefully managed facade. On Saturday morning, I visited the neighborhood hardware store to purchase potting soil and winter fertilizer for my hydrangeas. In the garden aisle, I encountered Sarah Miller, who lived 2 houses down from Brian on Maple Drive. Evelyn, it's good to see you, Sarah said, placing a pair of gardening gloves into her cart. Is everything all right over at Brian's? I saw Megan chasing the yellow school bus down the street on Friday morning with Toby's backpack in her hand. I offered a polite, discreet nod. Family schedules shift sometimes, Sarah. They are adjusting to new routines. Well, Buster was barking in the backyard until noon yesterday, Sarah added, with a sympathetic frown. Usually, you have him walked and settled before 9. We all noticed how quiet the street has been without your morning walks. Her words confirmed what I already knew: a home does not function on rigid digital checklists alone. It requires constant observational maintenance. Megan believed that domestic order was an automated state rather than a continuous expenditure of labor. Later that afternoon, while trimming my rose bushes along the front walkway, I watched Brian's silver truck pull into my driveway. He stepped out, looking visibly fatigued with dark circles under his eyes and rumpled work clothes. He walked across the lawn carrying a plastic grocery container filled with garden tools he had borrowed from my shed 3 months earlier. Here are your head shears, Mom, Brian said, setting the tools on the porch steps. He looked toward the front door, clearly waiting for an invitation to come inside for lunch, as had been our long-standing weekend habit. Thank you for returning them, Brian, I said from the flower bed, wiping my pruning shears with an oily rag. I'll put them away shortly. Brian lingered on the porch, shifting his weight between his work boots. He ran a hand through his thinning brown hair, a nervous habit he had possessed since high school whenever facing difficult conversations. Mom, the house is a disaster, Brian admitted, lowering his voice. Megan had back-to-back presentations yesterday, and the dry cleaner ruined my presentation shirts because nobody picked them up on Thursday. Toby had an allergic flare-up on his wrists because we forgot where you stored his special bath wash. I stood up holding my garden basket and met my son's gaze directly. Brian, those are standard household responsibilities. You and Megan are both capable adults with good educations and flexible hybrid schedules. We're drowning, Mom, he insisted, stepping closer. Megan didn't mean to offend you on Wednesday. She's just under immense pressure at the firm. Can't you just come over for a few hours in the afternoon to watch Toby and help us reset? Megan spoke clearly, and she spoke her truth. I replied, keeping my posture straight and my voice calm. She stated that I was merely grandma and that my presence interfered with your household authority. It would be disrespectful of me to ignore her explicit boundary. She was just venting, Brian said, his frustration finally breaking through his quiet demeanor. Why do you have to be so stubborn about a single sentence? Respect is not a luxury reserved only for convenient moments. Brian, I said softly. When your father was alive, we managed our home while both working full-time jobs. We never treated our parents as unpaid staff while demanding they remain silent. I love you and Toby, but I will not enter a home where my dignity is treated as an optional courtesy. Brian looked down at the porch floor, unable to formulate a response before turning slowly back toward his vehicle. On Monday, I began my new routine at the Community Literacy Center. I was assigned to work with two fourth-grade students who required additional assistance with reading comprehension. Sitting at the low oak library table, guiding a young girl named Clara through a chapter book about marine biology, I felt a deep sense of purpose that had nothing to do with domestic obligation. After my volunteer shift ended at noon, I drove to the local farmers market on High Street. I selected fresh butternut squash crisp apples and artisan sourdough bread. Without the pressure of meal prepping 5 family dinners every week, my grocery bill dropped significantly, and my time belonged entirely to myself. I spent Tuesday afternoon joining a book discussion group at the county library, an activity I had postponed for over 3 years. The members were retired teachers, accountants, and nurses who shared thoughtful perspectives without drama or entitlement. For the first time since Arthur's passing, my house felt like a sanctuary rather than a staging area for someone else's life. Meanwhile, small reports reached me through the community network. My friend Martha, whose granddaughter attended Toby's school, mentioned during Wednesday coffee that Megan had missed the after-school pickup window twice in 4 days, resulting in late fee notices from the district administration. Megan had attempted to hire a local college student as an afternoon nanny, but the arrangement collapsed within 48 hours when the student quit over conflicting chore lists and rigid digital monitoring. Megan was learning that money cannot instantly purchase the dedicated vigilance of someone who genuinely loves a child. I did not celebrate their difficulties. I simply continued tending my own garden, preparing my own balanced meals, and honoring the boundary that Megan herself had established so emphatically at her kitchen counter. On Thursday evening, Megan made her first direct attempt to resolve the situation, though she approached it as a management negotiation rather than a personal reconciliation. She sent a lengthy formal email to my personal inbox at 8 o'clock at night. The message contained a bulleted list titled Family Collaboration Protocol. She proposed a structured arrangement. I would provide childcare from 2:30 to 5:30, every weekday transport Toby to soccer practice, and prepare 3 predetermined dinners per week. In exchange, she offered to pay for my bi-weekly house cleaning service and provide a dedicated parking space in their garage. The email contained no apology, no acknowledgement of her previous remarks, and no recognition of personal relationships. To Megan, human interaction was simply a matter of resource allocation and contract negotiation. She assumed that my time was unoccupied and that my withdrawal had been a temporary emotional reaction designed to elicit a financial concession. I read the email carefully from my study desk, noting the corporate phrasing and transactional tone. It was the same managerial style she used on her remote project teams. She genuinely believed that everyone had a price, and that my life possessed no intrinsic value outside of serving her family unit. I did not draft an angry response or compose a lengthy critique of her character. Instead, I clicked the reply button and typed 3 concise sentences. Dear Megan, thank you for the detailed proposal. However, I am currently fully committed to my volunteer work at the Literacy Center and my weekly community obligations. I will not be available for scheduled domestic or childcare duties. Best regards, Evelyn. I hit send, closed my laptop, and walked into the living room to finish reading my historical novel. 10 minutes later, my mobile phone began vibrating continuously on the side table, but I turned the ringer off and went to bed. Friday brought a severe autumn rainstorm that swept across central Ohio, knocking down tree branches and snarling afternoon traffic on the interstate. At 4:15, the landline in my hallway rang persistently. When I answered, Brian's voice was strained to the point of breaking. Mom Megan is stranded at the airport in Chicago because of ground stops, and my construction site on Route 315 had a major retaining wall collapse, Brian said, talking rapidly over the sound of heavy rain hitting his windshield. The school aftercare closes at 5, and they will call Child Protective Services if Toby isn't picked up by 5:15. I'm stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, 12 miles away. "I am on my way, Brian," I said, immediately without hesitation. My boundary was never intended to put my grandson in jeopardy. I put on my raincoat, grabbed my umbrella, and drove carefully through the waterlogged streets. I arrived at the school entrance at 4:40. Toby was sitting on a wooden bench beside the administrative desk, clutching his backpack, with red, tear-stained cheeks. When he saw me step through the double-glass doors, his entire face lit up. "Grandma!" he shouted, running across the linoleum floor and wrapping his small arms tightly around my waist. I knelt down, hugged him warmly, and signed the release log with the front desk clerk. I drove Toby back to my house, not Brian's. I made him a bowl of warm tomato soup, helped him change into dry clothes from a spare set I kept in the guest room, and sat with him on the rug while he assembled a wooden train track. There was no chaos, no frantic shouting, and no rigid charts. There was only safety warmth and the calm environment a 7-year-old boy needed after an anxious afternoon. At 7:30 that evening, headlights swept across my front windows as Megan's SUV pulled into my driveway, followed immediately by Brian's truck. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. A moment later, the front doorbell rang twice with urgent force. I opened the door to find Megan standing on the porch, her designer coat soaked at the shoulders and her hair disheveled from travel. Brian stood behind her, looking utterly defeated. Megan looked into my warm hallway, seeing Toby laughing quietly as he read a comic book on the living room sofa with a cup of warm milk on the side table. The panic that had driven her across town finally gave way to complete emotional exhaustion. She stepped across the threshold, leaned against the entryway wall, and covered her face with both hands. He was safe the whole time. Megan whispered, her voice trembling with genuine remorse. I was sitting in that airport terminal having a panic attack, realizing that I burned the only bridge that actually kept our lives from falling apart. I stood quietly, allowing her words to hang in the air without interrupting. "Evelyn, I am so sorry," Megan said, lowering her hands and looking at me with red, exhausted eyes. "I was arrogant. I thought running a home was just about enforcing rules and managing schedules like an office. I treated your care as an annoyance because I was insecure about my own ability to handle everything. I told you not to interfere, but the truth is, you were the only person holding everything together." Brian stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder while looking at me with deep gratitude. For the first time in 2 years, Megan was speaking not as a manager demanding performance, but as a humbled mother recognizing her profound limitations. I motioned for Brian and Megan to sit at my kitchen table while Toby remained happily occupied with his book in the next room. I poured 2 mugs of hot tea and set them down without ceremony. "I accept your apology, Megan," I said, sitting across from them. "However, things will not return to the way they were before. I will not be your daily housekeeper, and I will not take over the responsibilities that belong to the 2 of you as parents." Megan nodded slowly, holding the warm mug between her palms. "I understand. We don't expect that anymore." We established a clear, healthy framework that evening. Brian agreed to adjust his work hours to handle the morning school transportation, while Megan arranged to work from home on alternating afternoons to manage after-school activities. They agreed to hire a professional cleaning service for heavy chores and take full ownership of their household operations. My role was redefined strictly as a grandmother. I agreed to host Toby at my home every Wednesday afternoon for baking, reading, and homework, and to provide emergency backup support when professional obligations made it genuinely impossible for them to be present. 2 weeks later, the brass house key remained on my dresser where it belonged. When I visited Brian and Megan's home on Sunday for family dinner, I rang the front doorbell and waited to be welcomed inside as an honored guest. Megan opened the door with a warm, respectful smile, stepping aside to let me enter. In the living room, Toby ran to show me a drawing he had made at school, while Brian set the dining table with genuine care. The invisible work was now shared where it belonged, and the dignity I had quietly defended had become the very foundation of our restored family peace.